Hey, this is Dr. Birdwell again, and I'd just like to give you a little bit of an introduction to the Earth Science class that we're getting ready to start. The first chapter, you're going to be studying about the Earth as a dynamical system and many of the various components that go into creating the planet that we call home. And I think that what I'd like you to do as you're reading these materials is ask yourself the question, how do these things fit together? How do they all contribute to making the planet habitable? Because I think what we'll find through this course is that there's a lot of amazing coincidences, or I would say design, that go together to make this planet livable. You know, just as an example, we'll talk about solar input. I think we all know that it's important that the Earth be the distance it is from the Sun for it to have the right climate, but what you may not know is that the solar input has varied dramatically through geologic time, and that it was the Sun was much brighter when it was first created, and at some point in time was actually 10% less bright than it is now, and then has gradually moved up to the present level. So what's amazing about that is that the Earth's climate has maintained its stability, and there's a lot of other factors that have to go into that to compensate for that solar input. That's just one of many examples you'll see in the course. The atmospheric fine-tuning is another factor. If you go by the mass of our Earth and you compare, say, our Earth to other planets of similar mass, you find that the Earth should have an atmosphere that's a lot heavier and denser than it currently is. And that would be a problem for life if it was that dense. Take Venus, for example, has an atmosphere that is many tens of times denser than the Earth's, and yet Venus is very much a near twin in size to the Earth. The formation of the moon has something to do with that, and we'll get into that later in the course. Volcanism and plate tectonics. Plate tectonics, we'll study that. That refers to the movement of the mantle and the crust of the Earth, which is just the top few miles on top of the mantle, that moves around, and thus the continents move around and the oceans change size as time progresses. That is also important to recycling minerals and even taking carbon out of the atmosphere. The biosphere, all the life on the Earth, even plays a role in balancing out the climate, because depending on what kind of life and how much and where, it affects how much carbon is cycling through the atmosphere and the ocean and the land, and that affects the climate as well. In Chapter 2, you're going to be focusing on matter and minerals, and you'll be learning about the various elements and minerals. And keep in mind as you're reading this chapter that a lot of these minerals are very important for the sustenance of human civilization, and that a lot of these things are not going to be found on just any planet. Did you know that, for example, many of the metals that we mine actually are in concentrated ores, which makes it easier to mine? There's a lot of metals in the Earth that are just we're not able to mine because they're not concentrated enough and they're not economically viable. But bacteria, something as simple as bacteria, actually plays a role in concentrating metals so that we can mine them. And organic creatures, in other words, living creatures that have lived on the Earth before us, have actually contributed greatly to the minerals that we now use to sustain civilization. For example, things like oil and natural gas. We drive our civilization with energy from those things. But even things like gypsum, which goes into sheetrock, and limestone, which goes into things like concrete and road surfaces and construction. Not all planets are going to have these things. In fact, we don't know of any other planet that has these things, despite the fact that something like 1,000 planets have been discovered so far through astronomical studies. And then later in the course, we are going to be studying meteorology and the atmosphere, the oceans, and then we'll finish off with astronomy, and we'll be focusing there on formation of the solar system and how the universe expands and the various stars interact with each other. And I hope that you will get an appreciation through this course, not only of a knowledge of Earth science and of cosmology and astronomy, but also an overall knowledge of how it all fits together and how it really points to a designer.